Sir. Smooth and 98.1. Love music, love life. This is a Freshly Pressed. We're looking at the news stories making the headlines across the country. And as always, we'd love to hear from you. We want to get your thoughts to let us know what you're thinking, what your opinions are with regards to the headlines, of course. The WhatsApp number is 0809 440 981. You can also tweet at Smooth981 or X at Smooth981. Hashtag is Freshly Pressed 981. And don't forget, we're streaming live on YouTube as well. It's Smooth 981. That's the channel. Don't forget to subscribe. And of course, you can post your comment on there. This morning, our analyst is Chibuzor. Good morning, Chibuzor, and welcome.
Good morning, Lagos. Good morning, Zibby. Nice to be here.
It's our pleasure to have you as always. All right, let's start off with the first headline. And this one is coming from Punch. Tinubu, AGF, wants LG reforms to tackle insecurity, governor's abuse.
Okay, so this is a very interesting story, and I'm gonna go from left to right on the story because there are some very interesting points raised by both the AGF and by the president via the AGF on this issue. So the president has blamed the worsening insecurity of the country on the poor state of governance in the local government areas across the country. Um, He's saying that basically saying that democracy would count if people at the grassroots were not denying the dividends of good democracy. Um, so basically the AGF is basically the Minister of Defense is saying that in well-governed states, that a well-governed state, and we are talking about the state as in the president, the federal government, the state now, and the local government, you see the well-governed state. So they're now pushing the baton down to the states, was better equipped to address internal challenges such as terrorism, insurgency, and communal violence. The president says, study the state of our local governments is a case of concern, degradation, incapacity, and have continued significantly and contributed to our developmental setbacks. So, both the president and the AGF and the minister are basically singing from the same hymn book. And the cynical part of me says that they are basically saying that everybody else is responsible for the bad situation of things apart from ourselves. So that good governance, if good governance is coming from the local governments, it's coming from the states, that things will be fine. It's basically like moving the searchlight of the federal government. I think it will be a good day for us to pack a bit away from the federal government because I think enough has been said about what the challenge is and what we think the federal government is doing or not. But let's zero in on what the issues they're trying to raise. So, in truth, there is some sense to what they are saying in terms of the states doing a lot more if they were strengthened to take care of their things like communal clashes, which actually should start at local governments and going to the states because basically they're in charge of the communities, the local chiefs, and whoever local community leaders and all that. They should be the first point of talk. So they're saying if these guys are working as they ought to be working, if they're doing what they ought to be doing, then things will be fine. So it's a point to take, and the AGF went further to talk about how they wanted to push to take away the responsibility or how they were looking at moving the responsibilities of conducting elections for local governments from the state electoral commissions to the federal electoral commission, which is INEC, which is quite interesting. So there's a lot, if you unpack what has been said, there's a lot about the competence of the leadership at the local government levels, the ability to deliver the structural sort by interference by the state governors in how they were selected and how they ran their things. I think a lot of statement on the side, obviously, which is packed, is about the direct funding of local governments, which if last time I checked, is being challenged in court by some local government chairmen and a lot of the states. The states have basically seen the local government as an appendage. Over time, I've seen the local government as an appendage of themselves instead of an independent body like themselves. So in instances where the president cannot wake up and remove a governor overnight, we have instances where state governors wake up and remove local government chairmen or appoint or create LCDs where the lines of communication or the lines of interaction are not really so clear, but because of obviously most states, what we have is party dominated states. So the party has basically all the seats, and even when the party doesn't have the seat in the state, you have people who cross carpet to the dominant party over time. So the governor is able to do a lot. And if I recall, it's quite interesting how we talk about how the local governments have been strengthened, and maybe President Tinubu was needs to look back at when he was state governor years ago, and what roles he also played back in Lagos State. But it's something that has happened, and he's raised a very good point, and they've all raised very good points about how the local governments are not working the way they ought to be working, how they should be strengthened, and the possibility of moving the election, handling of elections to INEC instead of the state. For me, theoretically sounds nice, but also it also takes away some of the, and it might bring a lot more of the separation of powers because it reduces the ability of the state governors to actually affect or effect the selection of these individuals. But what we should actually be looking at is how well can we strengthen these institutions? How do we strengthen the institutions of local governance such that we have professionals working at local government level, at all levels of local government? It's not just a giveaway and a settlement to its political settlement rule. How do we attract the best people who are not, who are there to make changes at those levels? How do the people at the local government level hold them accountable? I have been, I've as I don't think I've really in the last how many years, I don't think I've been involved in local government election. And it's given because largely on the days where these guys want to reach out and go and spread their messages or campaign, they typically pick a weekday, a middle of work day. Unfortunately, I have a job that I have to go to, so I'm never around. Driving in the evening, I probably see them closing up when they put up the tents and after they're having their jamborees. So, but some of them actually do some work. They're local government chairman, and some people actually try to hold them accountable. So I think it's a two-way thing. Yes, like the president said and his ministers have said, we need to hold them accountable. They need to do much better. They need to be strengthened. We need to attract the best. They need to be, but we also, as the electorate, need to hold them accountable. Most of us need, and I'll start with myself, we need to do a lot better about how we hold our local government officials accountable. So, yes, I do agree with the president. It's not just about the presidency. We need to look at the state governments, and also we need to look at the local governments in this instance. So those are things that for me that are very critical in this stage.
All right, thank you, Chibuzor, for that. Let us know your thoughts. 0809 4440981. That's the WhatsApp number. And you can also tweet at smooth981. Next headline comes from Daily Trust. In his message on the celebration of Children's Day, the president says no effort will be spared in securing the children's future.
Good buzzwords. No effort will be spared in securing the children's future. The question I would ask the president and most Nigerians is, what is the future of the average Nigerian child? What future has what is it dovetails into one thing I always talk about. What is the Nigerian dream? What if a child is born today? Where can that child, without the constraints or without the impetus of coming from a wealthy family background or coming from particular places, how well can that child grow without having to look at, just looking at basically the structures of society, and when I look at the structures of society, I see, the environment he lives in, the communities he has to stay in, the basic thing, education he has access to, what other thing we talk about? We talk about healthcare conditions, even from childbirth. How does this child, how does this baby become an infant? This infant become a child? Does he have the best facilities to make him, if he has any, at the point where his mother is about to give birth to him? Does she have the access to the best facilities to make sure that that childbirth process comes to bear and that child comes out? Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves today. How do we ensure that children are being fed properly? How do we ensure that children are able to aspire to become the best possible without having to be pushed by their family name or family background? And I say a lot of things because I speak like that of my own experiences, and I tell people, years ago when I was growing up, you could look at even places like Lagos, which is where I grew up. You could look at the educational systems and you knew that, okay, you know what? If your parents could not afford to send you to a private primary school, you could still go to a public primary school and get some level of education. You could go to a public secondary school and get very good education, because then there were several of those schools that were quite attractive in Lagos State back then. And you did not necessarily need to go to private schools. What has happened today is that, a lot of people do not either and I would speak with somebody who has some insight into some education standards, that in some instances the educational standards have fallen. And we're not just talking about the ability of the teachers, we are talking about the environment, you know. There's a lot to be said and unpacked around these issues. How are we remedying those issues? How are we ensuring that the schools have a steady flow of people who are going to come and teach those things that need to be taught in 2022 or 2020, sorry, 2024 for the Nigerian children, and will prepare them for the future that they need to embrace. You know, how are we preparing the teachers? Are we paying the teachers well enough to be able to bring our best to those schools? And I'm talking about for your the list of the list. I'm not talking about those, you know, I'm not talking about the highest, I'm talking about the list of this. How do you make a future for them? So it's all good that the president can come out and send officials and you can make statements on Children's Day, but the work to make sure that these promises are kept has to be done 24/7. And it's not just about the Ministry for Children Affairs or whatever. It's concerted because it has to be strategic, it has to be systemic, because everything, you know, when parents can't feed, when inflation rates are jumping as high as they are jumping today, and parents can't feed, when if you know are not making enough money, what the parents obviously cut down on feeding obviously directly affects the kids, you know. Either way, if parents can't feed, they're not going to be there to take care of the children the way they ought to take care of the children. So we need to look at this from, you know, if Nigeria is good and we have a country where every single individual in the country can look forward to some good future, then the Nigerian child will also be able to look forward to a wonderful future. And all the other things will come into place to protect the child from every other thing that needs to be protected. They need to be protected from, sorry, including a lot of the security challenges that have attacked children repeatedly over the last um, 16 to 20 years in Nigeria.
Now, speaking still about children, education, and action, the Lagos state government is saying that they've enrolled about 12,000 out of school pupils. And there's some statistics here, and it says from 2009, they've worked hard to support children, and they've created 9 new schools in busy and remote areas, and that these schools now have 4,588 students in a pretty even split, almost even split among the genders.
Okay, it's good that they've built more facilities, and I think Lagos State progressively has been able to look at facilities in terms of school facilities and build them up. So back in the day, you had the Jakonde schools. I think that was when under the former leadership of the former Lagos State Governor Lateef Jakonde, where he decided, where in able to meet up with the infrastructure, they built out these buildings. Yeah, they weren't fancy. They had bare walls, louvers or glasses, but they were able to do what, you know, what the problem they were able to solve at that time was to help you move from what people were, I believe people were shifting or having schedules where they had to go to school, and make sure everybody was enrolled at the same time. And they were able to solve those problems. And we've moved to the point now where we're building up a lot of infrastructure. The next thing, and I know this was discussed, I think last week, I think was on Freshly Press, where it was raised about reviewing the curriculum. The curriculum we have today, you know, is it future fit? That needs to be looked at. The kids, you know, facilities that the kids have in those schools. So it's not just enough to have 4 walls. You need to have 4 walls, and you need to have infrastructure to support education. You need to have the teachers who are trained to be able to deliver future fit education. So there's a lot of complexity that comes into, apart from building up the buildings. But yes, it's the first step. So we'll give them kudos for doing what they've done, because I do know from experience that there are several states in this country today who have large land resources, but have not bothered or are not able to even provide basic school infrastructure for their kids.
All right, thank you, Chibuzor. Let's look at some of the messages coming through. Adopsy says no effort shall be spared at securing the future of the Nigerian child. Never in an era have we had more delusion. Actions speak louder than words. And Ajayi says the president is beginning to see clearly that the absence of democratic governance at the local governments is causing serious havoc to the security situation in the country. The earlier the constitutional provision of autonomy for local governments is enforced, the better. You're listening to Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1. Do stay with us. More headlines and, of course, more of your thoughts shortly. So I think we can sort of merge this one, the Nigerian Air story, and
Okay.
airport's concession. So we'll just start off with the Nigerian Air, and then we'll link to the concession.
That's fine.
Okay.
Kiamo was a minister under the same.
Sorry?
Kiamo was making a lot of noise now. Was a minister under the same previous regime. So I find it quite interesting when he speaks like this, very emphatically.
It's freshly pressed on Smooth 98.1. Zibby here, and we have the analysts in. We're looking at the news stories making the headlines across the country. Would love for you to be a part of the conversation. Let us know what your thoughts are. The WhatsApp number, send your messages to, is 0809 4440981. You can tweet at Smooth981, and we're streaming live on YouTube as well. Smooth981, that is the channel. You can catch the live stream, and you can also post a comment on there as well. The analyst this morning is Chibuzor, and we're going on to The Guardian. FG suspends fraudulent Nigeria air indefinitely.
Okay. So this story I find very interesting. And you know, we all so for everybody who doesn't know, some years ago we were the last regime, the last presidency, obviously from the same party, with some of the same ministers, went about and were trying to offer a national carrier. And what happened at some point, some aircraft was paraded in front of Nigerians, Nigerian colors, and so this is what the current minister, who was also a minister in the last regime, is saying that this is what we met on ground. He uses the word "this is what we met on ground" as if he wasn't around to meet it on ground or put it on ground. But it's very easy to disassociate yourself from those kind of things. So he's basically called this out that the current government is basically calling that they've declared an indefinite suspension of the Nigerian air project. The current minister has said that basically what they saw the last time, what was presented the last time, was basically an Ethiopian air franchise, because it doesn't make any sense if you have you have a national car where another country or another entity is going to take out 60% or more of the profits and leave you with whatever is left with. So they made the arguments about what was presented and what has happened has not been right. For me, the proper learnings of that is that how do we go about doing this kind of projects? What are the processes to follow through? Do we leave everything to political inclinations or political moves? Because now everybody has said, oh, it's a failure, and you're chasing after the former minister. But is this how we do everything in Nigeria, where a minister, what stops the current minister from doing his own pet project, and somebody coming the next time and scrapping in and saying, oh, we've lost X amount, because we've actually thrown a lot of money into this investment as a country. When I use we, I mean as a country. So I do know that some processes have started out to invite the former minister Hadi Sirika to come and answer questions about what they've done. But in looking at what we are trying to achieve in terms of having a national car, the question is, obviously Nigeria is looking at very lean resources at the moment. So whatever project we're going to carry out in terms of being a national car, we're not going to be able to fund fully. We're going to have to look for funding elsewhere. So we're going to look for partnerships. Whatever partnership you are going to able to draw out, the partnership model will be based on how much you can put on the table. So it's easy to say, that you can't have one when 60% is going to somebody other party, but how much are you able to put on the table to ensure that you are putting your money where your mouth is? So we still look at I'm one who I'm neither here nor there when it comes to the national carrier project. I think what we need to do is we need to answer the question: is the national carrier a pride thing, or are we looking at the business entity that is going to rival the likes of the Ethiopian airs in Africa? Because if you look at the likes of South African Air and Ethiopian Air, for instance, these are entities that have, I think they were separated over 100 years or something ridiculous. It's quite shameful as Nigerians. We are not able to do that. We've defunct the last one, and we've not able to do anything different since then. So we need to ask ourselves questions about what do we want to achieve. And the government in power and the minister obviously seems to be going in particular direction. So we see how it goes, and we hope to hold them accountable. He's also spoken about the poor state of Nigerian airports. And I think if anybody who has had the opportunity to leave the country and come back in, one of the big hits you get is that when you come back in, you do know you are back in Nigeria, and it's a bit And when I say Nigeria, I'm comparing with other countries that I think we should be looking at. You go into some other, we need to look at it also from a strategic point of view. What do we want from our airports? Do we want to be that central hub around West Africa where people are flying in and flying out and connecting to other countries? Because we do have road borders with some of the other countries. Our idea of what we want to achieve with the airports will determine how we invest into those airports. We have a lot of airports across the country that we probably need to ask ourselves if we need those numbers of international airports or if we need them to remain international airports and how do we need to manage them. So they are talking about concessions and they are reviewing. I think the next story what they were basically
Yes,
looking
from
at
Premium
from
Times.
Premium Times. There is talk about how they are reviewing the concessions that were granted by the last government. Um, and this is largely been driven by the House. The House Committee on Aviation basically calls it a fraud. Um, you know, they want to review the concession process and make it a bit more transparent. I hope the minister is able to bring his wealth of experience from the last process to make this a more transparent process. Because, like I said, he was a minister in the last regime. Um, and you know, we do need concessions. Obviously, mean it's a standard process across the world. It's something that like I said, our procurement processes. How do we go through these things? Are this when we talk about we talk about transparency. We talk about as if it's something completely distinct from the way we should do business, and we're having to do something special. It should be our way. It should be a standard process, operating procedure for everything we're doing. So I do hope we standardize these things and we're not talking about it as something different. Whenever we're doing concession, either be for airports or bus parks or everything, there should be a process that goes through it. You should be able to provide particular documents, particular committees or whoever is looking at it, the officers are looking through it. They're making decisions based on particular, there are forms. There's a standard process. So we are not reinventing the wheel every time we are doing it, and after wasting 4 8 years, we come back and say want to turn it around again because obviously there are times when you sign some of these contracts, there are legal costs because the other party who's obviously gotten a concession at the end of the day will probably comes back in and says he wants to challenge you, and you go through the entire process. It wastes everybody's time, wastes our efforts, and we need to move forward. So hopefully we get it right this time, and we do get the standards of the airports that we deserve as a country. And when I say we deserve as a country of Nigeria's supposed status, sorry, in Africa and the world, we do get those kind of airports that will bring in people and long term will bring in the revenue we require.
All right, thank you for that, Chibuzor. Fabian from Ekbe says, our president and a number of governors need to start working and stop talking. When the government creates an enabling environment for children to go to school in any part of the country without fear of kidnapping, when states stop making principals and heads to promote children who have failed in class, when the children's parents who have money to take better care of the child, then the government can pontificate. Gilbert Musa says, on securing the future of children, first things first, have we secured the future of fresh graduates from our tertiary institutions annually? All these years, has security improved across the country? The answer is blowing in the wind. Joseph says, the impunity of the highest level. So the FD cancels the Air Nigeria project after all the money's plunged into this fraudulent transactions, the White Elephant projects, yet no head is rolling or anyone being arrested. Well, technically, the former minister is in court. In same countries, all those involved will be rotting in jail. Again, Joseph, there's a process. Yinka Bolu says, I was with guys recently and I asked what would have happened if it was not Ethiopian Air but Ghana Airways instead of this whole Air Nigeria scheme of things. You don't want to know what happened next. Aisha escaped. So are we sure we understand what we want with this airlines matter? Or is it just emotions and political views? Let's move on to the next headline, and this one comes from Premium Times. Nigerian government seeks wider consultations for change of country's national anthem. Chibuzor, do you know the old anthem?
I was joking with some friends that I probably have to do some relearning, but hey, life is constant. Learning is a constant thing in life. So it's a good thing. At least, it will trigger a lot of us to go back and actually, a lot of us that care to go back and, for some of us that were not born then and the anthem would go back and learn it. But I'm a bit, so when the news came out, I think I heard this news, was it on Thursday? I had gone through the readings. The first thing that came into my head was, was this the most important topic before the Senate or the House of Reps that day? Was this the most important thing, challenge for Nigeria? Because I look, and I know a lot of people are nostalgic because I think it's a, I don't want to go into generational wars, but I think it's a polite generation who's pushing for this argument. And, it's quite interesting if a polite generation is pushing for this argument and we look at if you look at the spread of Nigeria, we say that we have a young population and there's a bit of a problem that, the guys who are dragging these discussions are not in that, because a lot of the younger population don't even know about that this anthem exists. But let's go back to, for me, I do feel that it's a bit of majoring on the minor. But yes, the Minister of Justice has said that they want that said they actually had a public hearing. Wow. On this, which is part of the process to pass any bill. They had a public hearing on the bill to revert to the old national anthem. Bill hearing was jointly organized by, like I said, personally, I think this is a waste. Well, this is majoring on the minor. Let me not use the other phrase that I would like to use.
Thank you for that.
So the Senate Committee of Judiciary, Human Rights and Legal Matters and Interior, three powerful committees, are trying to push this issue. The minister has basically said there's a need for a wider engagement with Nigerians before it becomes law. He has proposed further consultations through zonal public hearings, resolutions of the Federal Executive for Fair Council of State, National Assembly is going to join this jamboree. Consequently, it's my considered view that the decision to change, whether by replacing the old anthem with a new one, should be subjected to a wider process of citizen participation through zonal hearings. So at the end of the day, what his basic argument is that we need to talk to a lot more people. We need to have a lot more meetings and gatherings to be able to push this down. Obviously, this will be funded by the people of Nigeria. And, that before we go through this, and we can actually have a complete new anthem driven by some competition. You want an anthem that is acceptable to everybody. My gut feeling is that we'll probably end up having a new anthem, and because of why I say that's my gut feeling is that I do feel a lot of people are more interested in legacies and building up new stuff than actually solving problems. But hey, because if you look at the criticism of the current anthem, I struggle to see a lot of the criticism. I start to see a lot of the current anthem asks a lot of questions that we're not able to answer. And I think instead of answering those questions, we're running away from it and saying we want to create something, we want to bring something back that's going to spur us. The words in the anthem are not going to spur us to change whatever decision we are. We need to look at ourselves and look at the situations we have on the ground and see how do we change it. How many Nigerian kids know those anthems, know the anthem, the current or the old anthems? How many, if you do a poll and ask Nigerian kids in school age or people, Nigerian youth, how important the anthem or the words of the anthem are to them today, they will probably laugh at you and you'll probably call over. That's my personal opinion. So, like I said, we're going to do all the jamboree and partying and let's see where we get with this. But hey, like I said, majoring in the minor.
Let's take a few messages. Fabian says, we don't need to change our anthem, but our senators and politicians need to read and understand the first and especially the second stanza of the present one and think deeply if they are living it. They also need to be more focused on our key priorities. Deji says, those asking for the old anthem, can they sing either new or old? Well, if they're into primary school in Nigeria, I believe most would.
No, you will be surprised at the versions you would get.
Wow.
It's part of the problem with education. So if you do not, so if you are educated enough to ask questions, if you're doing it wrongly, you'll be able to say this doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, there's no comprehension for a lot of people being learned or taught properly. So they don't know when they're doing it wrong, and they've probably been carrying it around for years.
Well, Tyre says, zonal meeting for anthem. Kids today know songs that anthem. And Anthony says the Nigeria AirSAG is the biggest April Fool so far, targeted at over 200 million individuals. As for the LG autonomy, is there no provision in the law for the government at the center to deal with states that have already passed the law in that regard? So we can now identify those governors and state legislators who are enemies of grassroots development and those to be voted out of power. Well, that is all the time that we have for Freshly Pressed this morning. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your messages. And of course, special thanks to Chibuzor, our analyst, for being here this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a lovely day.
Do stay with us. There's a lot more to come on the Smooth Breakfast.